Okay, Nadine, you can go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I will be the moderator for today's session. My name as Gogo is Gogo Tembi. We have a few exciting healers from our community who will be joining us today. I'm extending my apologies in advance for the noise that you'll find from all over, because we know most of us are either working from home or we are working from community, so it's not easy to do what we're doing today. So I'd like to extend my apologies for that in advance, and then also for the fact that our moderator, Hari, could not be here today, and so hence I'm stepping into her role. I'd like to start off by perhaps handing over to our amazing healers so they can tell us a little bit about what they do and why they're passionate about what they do. So if Shifra could go first, that would be great. Shifra, you're muted.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Shifra, and Shifra was Moses' midwife in the Old Testament. So I'm very proud to be a doula, or you know, that my name carries that ancestral meaning. So that's it's Hebrew, and it's very amazing for me. Well, currently I'm the coordinator at the Counseling Hub in Woodstock, which was started in 2019 in March. And we just got together, a few of us, and just decided that, you know, we really wanted to provide accessible and affordable counseling, that the private sector, you know, charges for counseling between 500 and 2,000, and the public sector was really overwhelmed. So we liked Woodstock, and we felt that that was a place that, you know, many people could get to because it's near the main road and near the highway. So we do strength-based work, which is one of the psychological theories, but we don't stick to that. We very much include mindfulness and meditation and techniques to calm the nervous system, because we know that people are suffering at the moment and always, and particularly where I'm from, Cape Town, it's always been a traumatic city. I mean, I grew up during apartheid, and I was part of the mass democratic movement. I'm 67 years old. I've got two beautiful adopted daughters who are also queer. I've been queer for many years. I came out in London. And I just feel the stigma of mental health combined with the stigma of being queer. You know, it means that there are very few places that queer people can find solace or find a listening ear. And it's been very much part of our program that we be very inclusive of people who don't have access to affordable mental health, multi-faith, inclusive mental health services. So that's just an introduction. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm told that Gogo Aya has also joined us, which is great news. Can I ask Gogo Anele to do the same? Just tell us about the work that you do and why you find it important to do your work in a sense that decolonizes as an Indigenous leader.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anele. I am a clinical psychologist by training and also a lecturer at the University of Johannesburg. I teach in the psychology department from undergrad to postgrad, and I do postgrad supervision. And I'm undergoing my process of becoming a Nyanga. That is one who is called to be a healer within the framework of Amaxhosa. So I am undergoing my training as one who has been bestowed with the gift, but needs to be initiated to understand all the ethics and everything that comes with that space. So where I come to the space, I am also queer. I am a black gay man. I have a whole lot of experience and things that I can share about my queer experience. So I often find myself oscillating in spaces of rigidity, of tensions, being queer, raised as Christian. My worldviews are still Christian orientated at some point in the way of how I make sense of faith, theology, and doctrine. I identify as a Methodist. At the same time, now with my other identity that's emerging, which is something that is becoming to be interesting for me and the majority of people around me. So that's basically part of what I am and part of what I do. My work is mostly centered around decolonizing psychology in South Africa, decolonizing sexualities, Africanizing sexualities. I am working with Professor Kopano Ratele on my PhD project that I'm still in the early phases of constructing my proposal, but mostly my work has been around masculinities, but now I'm interested in gay masculinities or whatever that looks like. So I'm Xhosa, I went to initiation school, but my curiosity has always been how do gay men who undergo through that space construct a different kind of masculinity if there is, or how they negotiate their identities in that space. So I'm working with Ratele to kind of work with that. So I'm still in the beginning phase, as I said, but I'm quite interested more on trying to understand rural masculinity. So I will be doing interviews with Black Xhosa men who are in rural areas that I would identify to try and make sense of how they make sense of being queer, rurality, and everything that comes with that. I think that is enough for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nkulu. Thank you. For our next healer, if Aya is ready, go. If you could answer the same question about what you do in terms of wellness and how that aligns with decolonizing wellness in the indigenous or South African sense.
Good morning, guys. Ayamangalisa. I am a Black queer traditional healer as well. I am part of a traditional healers forum that advocates for rights of gay or queer traditional healers. And also I work for Triangle Project, which is now also a human rights activist NGO, also fighting LGBTQI+. I am part of a psychosocial support as well. So I am part of a group that is finding alternative ways to healing in terms of also a psychosocial support. I think I have always been sort of part of a movement that I never knew about, even from when my initiation days, because Ndithwasile is Xhosa, and I have always been this person, even within Ephehlweni. It was never a question of me hiding who I was. However, I've always been of the notion that what I'm there to do has nothing to do with who I bed. So, but they were aware of the person that I was and what I bring forth to the table in terms of ukuthwasa kwami and incorporating my being to that. Also, same aspect as well. I had the same motion, I had the same movement. So as much as Bendili Twasana in all of those spheres, but I was also sort of doing on the ground education to the people who are within, because both Mapehlo were very staunch traditionalists. However, because of the way that I was and how I brought the whole thing to the table, I would like to believe Ndimke Emakayen on didn't share a mark on how to deal with someone, because more often than not, the question they ask is how do we then deal with someone or who is of the alphabet gang within a space where if you're a woman, there will be females in sharing space with you. How do we deal with such things? So yeah, that is me. Thank you.
So there is another healer that should be here, Kopano. I don't know if they are here yet. If you are here, I'm looking and I don't see that this person's here yet. If not, it's fine. I'll go ahead and join in and talk about my own journey. And again, guys, yeah, I'm so sorry about the noise. It just so happened that something unfortunate happened and I had to step in. So I had to come to a coffee shop to do this. So excuse me for the noise. My journey was very unconventional in how I started out. I am a colored South African person, and I had no idea. This was not a reference point for me. Being a healer was not a reference point. It was not something we did. It's not something we went to. I had no idea. So I started getting really sick in my teens. I started to get very, very sick. I had issues with my womb. I had issues where I would burp non-stop. All of these weird things were happening. I saw multiple doctors who thought that I had psychosis. I was on meds for psychosis, which didn't help because now I'm getting drumming. So it was things like that was going on, and it took a long time to get to where I was, where I finally, started dreaming about things, and it started to become more clear where I had to be. So my situation with healing has been a big one for me because it has been a point of needing to bring people back to their center where they belong, where they have forgotten, where they've had it beaten out of them, where, colored people often talk about the fact that they feel like they don't belong. And a lot of that is self-inflicted, number one. And then number two, it's the fact that we don't want to participate in things and we feel like it's not for us. And I understand where that comes from. But at the end of the day, this calling for me came from my ancestors who have made me, my ancestors who are not quote unquote colored people. And so this part has been so important for me because it's forced me to decolonize myself, my family, and then also by virtue of that, my community, because I grew up on the Cape Flats. So now this person comes back from, of course, from the Eastern Cape, from the Eastern Cape where I had to go to Asa. And I came back to my community on the Cape Flats, and everyone had to get used to it. And that was a major turning point because now I'm finding more and more people are interested, more and more people want to know, more and more people are coming and saying, okay, but I want to know about myself. So for me, the decolonization in healing came from that. It's not just healed me, it's not just healed my lineage, but it's also healed my community because I had no choice. It was very, very clear from very early on in my life that this was my path. I just didn't know what it was. But now, as a person who has gone through this process, who has figured out that there's not even just one gift, there's multiple, I didn't know these things existed. I find myself not being able to work a full-time job because this is what I find myself having to do all the time. And it's where my spirit finds peace. So a lot of my work goes into not just the decolonization, but also the stigma that people face being Sangoma. and then also what it's like to be a queer person who then either goes and has to go through this journey or even consults. Because I've had people come to me and say, Gogo, I went to this healer and I told him I was queer, but they were like, no, you have to find a woman because your people say you have to find a woman as a man. And I'm like, how can someone say that to you? So, it's also having a conversation amongst us as healers to try and figure out how do we address queer people? How do we speak to people that is affirming, that is sensitive of who these people are, sensitive of who the spaces that they occupy in the world. We can't just be speaking to people in jail about you should be marrying this person because apparently your ancestors say so. So, my work has been largely around that and the importance of that, the importance of also creating a community that is safe. So that's really about me and what I do and the shock that has been my journey. It's been very difficult, but I am happy that I am in the position to help others, be it from whatever space they come from. Of course. And then I would like to hand over to, I think the second person I asked, or the person I asked to speak first was Shifra. I'd like to ask her what decolonizing wellness for her means in terms of Western psychology, which is a large part of what the counseling hub does, because it does come from a place of Western psychology. But like she had mentioned before, they're very best to not just come from that one stream of thought or that one school of thought. So I would like for Shifra to maybe tell us a little bit more about that and how that looks and what people can expect when going to the counseling hub. Thank you.
I think, as a white Jewish queer person, where there is privilege, it's almost, and I feel that I do and can play an important part in decolonization. And for me, I was not interested in working in a mainstream situation because I too feel that I was born with the gift of listening and healing from my ancestors. I just need to say I'm very proudly Jewish. At the same time, some of my ancestors, my great-grandfather came from Palestine. I just want to put it out there that I'm very, very concerned with Palestinian rights and issues. And I think my politics, my father was a member of the South African Communist Party. I'm talking so many years ago because I'm almost reaching my 70s. I think it's important that we try ways that are inclusive, not only in language. I think it's about belonging and it's about owning your voice. And I think Black and people of color have had so little space in this society to do that, and especially around mental health issues because it's such a taboo. So it was very important to not only use the system of Western psychology, but to interrogate that and say, the client is the most important person here. What can I do to encourage wellness in this person? So it's about non-judgment. It's also about, as a carer, taking care of yourself. Because if you can't be some form of, not only role model, because we all fail and we all get depressed and anxious. Well, at least I do. And that's why, for me, I understand so much about mental illness. So for me, it was very important to provide tools and techniques that are out there from all civilizations, from our own indigenous people in this country that we can use, whether it be nutrition, movement, music, ways of breathing and walking. I'm a movement therapist, so I've always seen dance as a great healer. And I do use movement and sound in my sessions. I think we try and train our counselors, even though they all come from Western modalities, to look further at what is available from multi-faith perspectives and from decolonizing, meaning power and control, and not you trying to unlearn what they have learned in their studies. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Shifra. That makes a lot of sense because I do hear you on movement, right? I mean, even as Sangomas, the whole part of it is to sing and dance. And that's part of the healing, that's part of the journey. You don't leave your place of trust if you haven't learned how to do those things because it's part of healing. And so I think, at the end of the day, um, there are so many linkages between healing, but because some of our healing modalities are seen as primitive as compared to other things, it oftentimes gets ignored. Guitaring does not seem to hold the same place as say yoga does, and so that's something that we also need to at some point unpack as a culture, as a South African people. And then Gogo, Anele, if you are ready, do you mind giving us an insight into what decolonization means for you in your practice as a part of not just Western psychology, but in treating people who come to you, to your Indumba, to find a way to kind of help that person, whether they have an anxiety issue, whether they have a mental health issue. How is it that you, in your practice, in your Indumba, how do you bridge the gap there that isn't from an approach of just Western psychology?
Yeah, it's a very interesting journey for me, especially as someone who has just started to understand the ancestral world as one who is not just a participant observer. For the longest time, I've been a participant observer, and what do I mean by that? I'm born and raised from a family of healers, where we have Inyangi, we have Amakwele, that is heavily used in people who works with herbs. We've got Amatandazele, because we pray. There's quite a range of diversity in my family. So I've always known that world from that perspective. And because I thought I'm the privileged black, or one that has certain kinds of privileges, I'll be excused from entering into that space. So I continued with my life, hopefully, and hoping that one day this will not catch me. It will be one of those things that are just out there. But time past and experiences and a number of misfortunes and things happened that made me to step out from being the privileged black, to step out from the one who's educated and who understands the world in a particular way. So I've had to work with that for the past 5 years, trying to make sense of what this means for me. I would dream, I would see things, I would feel sensations. And at some point, for the past 2 years, just before me twice, I got extremely ill. I was diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy, a kind of an epilepsy that affects the left side of the brain. And we would have seizures, we would have quite a number of things that affect your functionality, your cognitive abilities, and all of that. So I went to the best hospitals, best doctors, to try and find what was going on with me. At some point, they thought I'm bipolar. At some point, they thought it's dysthymia. A lot of other diagnoses I was given, trying to make sense of what was this and what does it mean for me. That was all as a participant observer. But this year, things happened until I realized that this is what it is. I have to trust. It wasn't an easy journey and an easy thing to understand, especially looking at my intersections. One intersection being one who knows about this, who was raised under this context. Secondly, one who is educated as a clinical psychologist, who understands the Western psychological Eurocentric way of how the mind and the brain and everything works that works with that. Another identity that being raised as Christian to understand the world from a Christian perspective. Which is, you understand that from a Christian perspective and Christian theology, it's both the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? I was baptized, I was affirmed as a Methodist, I was confirmed, I served Jesus as my Lord and Savior, I did everything. In the Methodists, we've got different departments, we've got different ways, there was the guild, I've done it all, right? At some point, I offered for ministry and I did a course in theology to become a preacher. So I'm a qualified Methodist preacher. That's one identity. With this kind of identity, as a Christian and one who understands Christian doctrines and all of that, I'm serving in one of the highest ultimate bodies in the Methodist Church. That is the Doctrine, Ethics, and Worship Committee that deals with things of ethics and doctrine. That's one part. Another thing, I've always known that I'm queer. From as early as I was a young boy, I knew that I love other boys. I knew that there's something about other boys that draws me to them. And I had to wrestle with that for quite some time, trying to make sense. What is this? What is not? How do I make sense of this? What is my place in the world? How do I exist in a world where there's all of these other complexities? Now, understand that as a Christian identifying person, there's a particular construct about homosexuality and all of that. So these are all parts of, and again, as one that loves to read and write, I've written extensively about Ulwaluko, that is going to initiation school, on the psychological understanding of what it means to be initiated as a Xhosa man, from childhood, from boyhood to manhood and adulthood later. So those are some of the things that have helped me to construct my world as a healer that oscillates between two worlds, the Western Eurocentric way, the Western Eurocentric way, right? And the African perspectives of how we think about healing and how we think about psychology and doing psychology. Also, a healer from a perspective of being Christian, using prayer and everything else that we use, and being queer. So to come to the question as to how I make sense or understand decolonization or decolonizing psychology from a perspective of being a healer, it's a very complex thing. I'll use two examples or case studies to try and expand on what this means for me and how I make sense of it. So I'm kind of a controversial person. So post my process of Ukvumukufa, that is the first initiation kind of ritual that you do to affirm, you publicly declare your calling and affirming that you have what we call a tongue, or that someone that is with you to start doing the work. So I was confronted between two worlds. There I'm told by my Gobela, my trainer, that you have to look a particular way. That is your dress code, and all the gogos would know here the codes of how you dress, how you speak, how you breathe, and all of the, it's a whole range of a new school. I call it boarding school, right? When you go to board, you get given new rules and regulations of how to conduct your life. And I'm also in part-time private practice. So on Monday, I asked my Gobela, do I carry my bead or not? She says, you go with the flow, you'll see, and ask your ancestors what they would do. So time passed, I would wear my cloth, what we call ihia or ibai. And people would be quite curious as to what's going on. So when I enter into my therapeutic space, how it's structured, it looks like really it's a kind of a combination of modernity and spirituality. It's a combo of things that you can't judge. What is this guy on about? And there are candles, not just these kind of fragrance candles that look like it's kind of fleshy and fancy and all of that. So I had to explain to my patients, I've just done this ritual, it means this, and part of my dress code, I have to dress in this way. For some patients, it's not an issue. For some patients, it is an issue. But because of my public stance about my process, I have been able to understand who's my clientele. My clientele are people that want to experience dual therapy in whichever way of how they make sense of it. But I'll always explain to my patients that, remember, as much as I may have an understanding about this world, or you wanting to consult with me, one, I am inexperienced, I'm still a novice in this, I can't give you that. Secondly, the space is not conducive for that. But what we can do, because you are seeking some answers that are transcendent to that of a typical psychologist, what I will do for you, I will interpret and make sense of things that you wanting to understand. Predominantly people that come to see me, they've got anxiety, they have depression, some kind of brief psychotic symptoms, and quite a number of problems. So I'll explain what this anxiety looks like in psychology. Obviously using the DSM and everything else that we use as a diagnostic tool. I'll take them through that and explain what is probably going on. And most people that I've seen post-lockdown, their anxiety presentation had a particular kind of nuance in the way of how they would speak about those symptoms. And there's what I've kind of discovered in this course, that is what we call umbilini, and is what we call in English intuition. So I would explain to people that the kind of anxiety symptoms of presentation that you get when you have your typical ordinary anxiety, this is how it will look like. But umbilini, more like intuition in my head, there's something that it's telling. It's not just an anxiety, but it is an anxiety that informs what your body picks, what your spirit mind picks, and what everything else that is communicated to you that you need to make sense of. However, then I'm able then to say, this is what I understand as a psychologist. But if these symptoms transcend what I know and what I understand to be the clinical presentation, I will then send you to Gogo, Mangmang, to try and make sense of this like I would do when a patient is psychotic and send them to a psychiatrist to rule out all the psychotic symptoms and make sense of that. So in terms of my practice, I am a psychologist who happens to understand what the ancestral way of understanding mental illness means and what those symptoms could potentially mean. Predominant people that come to see me, it's people that know that they are gifted, right? It's either Amagrecha, it's either Inyangi or Sangoma or Abatandazelo, prophetic people, that they know that I have this capacity, but I'm able to unpack these symptoms for them psychologically, clinically, and also be able to then refer them. And what I would then do is to invite these people again back to my therapeutic sessions to say, what is the meaning of what you have gathered when you consulted with Gogo or Kulmama? And in that way, we're then able to understand the clinical presentation, the spiritual presentation, and what is required without me getting involved in that, because I'm governed by codes of ethics by HSSA that require me to be a psychologist and to offer that which is needed. However, I'm wary of the fact that there are visible identities that I have, and being trained psychoanalytically, and people who are trained in psychology will know there's what we call frame, you need to be this, you need to be anonymous, and all of those things. However, I don't identify with those some notions from that particular school of thought, because whether I say it or not, by virtue of now, I had to find a creative way to silence these identities that might be problematic for my practice. So I kind of integrated an element of modernity and fashion and creativity. So instead of wearing here, I'll wear a shirt that is made of here so that people don't think of it in that way. That it could be about fashion, right? But the presentation is not as obvious. I have my bead that I carry all the time. It's always in my head. But I'm wary of the fact that when I come to my space, I speak to my ancestors and speak and ask for consent for the time being that I'm seeing multiple patients that come from different environments. May I take this as a matter of respecting the work that I do as a psychologist. However, there are some patients who would not mind when I have this. Because of time, let me just quickly rush to my last point. Last week, I had a very interesting case. A couple that came to my space, they didn't know about me. They know of the good psychologist that they are referred to Anele Siswana. To their surprise, when they get to the good psychologist is dressed in a way that perturbed their understanding of this good psychologist, right? I had my beard on, I was hectic on that day. So I said, okay, well, let's start the process, but I could feel the level of resistance. And in my practice, I ban incense because there are different people who come with different kinds of smells. So I need a neutral smell that I can relate with. I've got white candles, I've got pink candles, it depends on my energy on that day. But on that day, I had happened to have a pink candle and all of these fragrance candles around me. And my setting is set up in a way that is quite very interesting. So what these people said, first, we want to know, who are you, by the way? So I asked, how is my being going to be important for this process? They say, we are asking because we are familiar with people who look like you, right? We are familiar with Inyang, we are familiar with the perspective. However, it doesn't resonate with us. So we don't know how much of what would be from the psychologist and what would be from Inyang that you proclaim yourself to be. So because we can't separate that in our minds and knowing how the spirit works how does it work, we are uncomfortable to work with this good psychologist who happens to have this identity that is problematic for what they need for their therapeutic space. So I then said, the two things that I can do, one, I was being controversial. When you come, I can potentially remove everything and anything else that is a problem for you, switch off my candles, create this neutral, and make sure that they don't burn in incense because we'll be coming. And the wife commented and said, in fact, I was going to comment on your incense because it's irritating my nose, right? So I said, okay, well, what do we do? I said, let's make a worst case scenario. One of the other identities that I have, I'm queer, I'm gay, I'm a black gay man. How does that, if you were homophobic, would it be the same case? They say, no, we will tolerate that because it's something that it's a social construct that others can negotiate in different ways. However, when it comes into this identity of you as a healer, that's what we can't resonate with because we don't know of how you separate these two things. So to cut the long story short, those people left and I had to refer them to another psychologist because of an observable identity, my beards and everything else that is so obvious for them. At the same time, an identity that is socially constructed differently about being queer. And I said, but the difference is, I so happen to be something that looks like black excellence, right? I'm in Sentin, right? I'm a black male clinical psychologist. I went to Rose University. So I have all of these other privileges that are part of the bigger package. But what is it that you're finding it so hard? Just one identity that is socially constructed in this way in society that you denounce everything else of this good psychologist. And so these are some of the experiences of how I've seen how this decolonization looks like, However, at the same time, I'm very wary of understanding that now, again, Shifra, that I have patients who come to me who have either dreamt of me or sent by their ancestors to seek for clarity. However, in the spiritual world, those are my spiritual kids. There am I'm sitting with HPCSA guidelines. There am I sitting with what the ancestral world is assembling me to do, that give this people perspective. If what would then happen after your process of training, whether we will train them or not, because I'm very aware of understanding that it's more like you are trained to be a trainer. So most of the time, the people that I come across with in my practice, they've dreamt of me, they've been referred. How now I have to constantly navigate. How do I decolonize HPCSA ethics? How do I decolonize when I have a gogo, I are coming to me in my practice and something in me, take off your shoes because this is your senior, right? How do I deal with people who, when they see me, they trance because they're either acknowledging gogo or cool, and I have to, towards this, I have to have my sniff in the room because there's a provocation of an ancestor that needs to be acknowledged in space. So for me, where am I in terms of practice? Space is very interesting. Identity in terms of what you see and in terms of what you don't see is very interesting for me. I don't want to take enough time, but thank you. I'll end up there.
Hey, of course. I'm laughing because I think we all, okay, maybe not all of us, but a lot of healers experience this, right? Where someone will recommend someone, even to non-psychologists, someone will recommend someone to me and say, oh, there's this woman, you must go and see, she'll help you with this, whatever. They come and they see me and they're like, hi, I didn't sign up for this. And it's just such a weird thing, right? That someone could be needing help, but they view you as this thing that is the enemy or something that is not of God. And now you're sitting there and you're like, oh, okay, I guess you don't have to be here. But you find yourself needing to help these people, right? For me personally, the thing that I wanted to share that was quite interesting and in line with what Ugogo had just spoken about was the healing space, and how for me personally, I was lucky to be referred to a Black psychiatrist for my psychosis at the time. And if it were not for me being recommended to this person, I would not have realized there was an issue. After this psychiatrist, highly trained psychiatrist, had put me on all of his meds, had tried all of these different things. He said to me, no, that's not the issue here. You are not psychotic. And he was the one who referred me to a gogo to go and seek help, because he said that he thinks that that's what's going on. So for me, that was a very, very positive experience, but it was also almost illuminating in how, you know, this Western profession, especially of a psychiatrist for people, could be almost mixed and amalgamated with traditional healing, where this doctor saw that there was an issue, and instead of just letting me leave and be like, I shouldn't sort yourself out, he was like, no, let me refer you because I think this is what's going on with you. And I think that if more of our, you know, traditional healers and psychiatrists and psychologists could work together, I think we would deal better with issues in our country, because some of these things require traditional healing, and some of them, yes, very much require mental health assistance, and it can even require both at the same time, because you can only imagine what it's like to hear drumming and you're not psychotic, but you're still hearing this drumming, how it can make you anxious, how it can make you feel like there's something wrong with you. So these are all issues that need to be almost aligned and sorted out at the same time. So if Aya is ready, I'd like to ask the same question about, you know, the gap between indigenous healing and spirituality and healing modalities that are from the West or even the East, right? Because we see how yoga and all of these things that are not necessarily from the West, how that is accepted and seen as okay. But our healing practices, there's this big gap between our healing practices and how it's perceived by some Africans. So if Aya is ready, I wonder if they could give us some insight into that. I don't know if they're here.
Thanks, Nadine. Thokozani, Kamagweni, Makosini, Dawe, Shewe. Wow, I feel like Anele. I'm sorry I didn't get igama lakho lasepehlweni, Gogo. I'm sorry for disrespect. I feel like the sentiments Zaki and myself are similar because I grew up in a very staunch Christian family. My mom is a Methodist through and through. So just the journey of becoming was a bit of a hassle for me. It was an issue for the longest of times. But I think when it was go time, it was go time. But also, I don't necessarily think the spaces that I am part of have had mainly a negative impact on my healing. Maybe because I don't necessarily wear beads or any of my regalia full time. It's rare that you would then see me with ihia or insimbi. The only plali I have is on my leg, my left leg, and even there, it's so people would then get to know Ayamangalisa before getting to know Unyoke Mnyama or Ujazengwe or Unjehlati. And then once they have then gotten to know the physical me, which is the person they see, Ayamangalisa, they sort of, then you would sometimes see there's clashes. But in my space, I've been very lucky in the sense that with the work that I do, people have been asking for alternative ways from Western healing. So I think I was sort of pushed into this by the universe. But in general, people would much rather have something else rather than a inyangi, especially if you're queer. I've had a few instances where people would come, when they first get to me, they are shocked that I'm female. Secondly, they are shocked that as they go on and proceed with the journey and the healing, they find what I'm queer. Without necessarily saying, Okanye, you would hear about, do they not have a snake? There's no way someone of the same sex angaba intimate without something else being there. And I think more often than not, personally, I've had issue with the fact that I am Xhosa, and now Nisthwasile Xhosa, and then ngapha ndinentsimbi ebomvu. So I sort of got backlash from my tribe more than other beings, because most often than not, we are seen as abantu bomgubo. So when now you have this person, oligqirha, decides okanye umbona the next day sele ethwase something else, people then sort of shun you out. So that has been sort of my main battle. And also with how I do my things, my way of healing, I've never conformed to how abantu want it to be done. So I've always sort of let the universe do the things. So sometimes you get those eyes where people don't necessarily trust what you're doing because of who you are. So it's been quite a thing for me, because even with my mother, she supported me physically and financially. However, for the longest time, I don't think she got it, because she would always say, no, you do your thing, but call. I think for her to sort of do the turnaround was when that was when Idlozi ladabuka and said, Mara, yes, you're here physically and otherwise, but we want you to, because as much as she was there, she wasn't there. So that for me was sort of a whole other thing, because I got where she was coming from, but as her child, I would have thought she would have understood and accepted me, because this was never an overnight thing. It was a whole entire journey. And for her to now, 5, 6, 7 years later, to still be holding back was sort of something else. But also I understood, and now I had to decolonize her as my mother, or Oli Kolwa, these things, this is how it is, and this is something you birthed, and it's not even about you. So we got talking, we got the conversations happening, and slowly but surely she has sort of been my go-to person, because even within her circles now people are coming out, people are sort of embracing things, and bit by bit things are opening up. However, you would still be in spaces where you can only have one of, you can't come to the space with Amahia, you can't come with Amapai, you can't come Twelinsimbi, all of those things, as Ugogo had said earlier on. But I am blessed where I am, because I am in a queer-friendly environment that allows me to be, and I have people who want to sort of go back to their heritage and embrace their lineage. And even, I remember the Trasama Kosini, Ugobela Wam is a very old woman, bless her soul, because she's still alive. But she didn't know what was happening, but the space, she allowed for the space to be opened up to such, and she wanted to learn, and she's continuing to learn. So I feel like we need to sort of, in our little spaces, start this movement, and I'm glad we have these spaces. Yeah.
Thank you. One thing that I just wanted to quickly add on to what Gogo has just said is that, we find ourselves talking about this thing of going back to heritage, right? And why going back to heritage is so important, why this thing comes up constantly as going back to heritage. And, my identity as a colored person has been a lot of that, even outside of my calling, has been a lot of going back to this heritage. And it's so difficult to understand why this is, while being on my own soil, this is having to go back to my heritage, going back to go and find it. But the reason for that is because it has been removed due to colonization, due to slavery, due to things like apartheid, so it's not as if, and even Christianity in a big way. So it's not that, we are going back to things because we have chosen to forget it, but it's because it's literally been beaten out of us. And another thing that I wanted to really mention or really go into and discuss is the fact that, apartheid and colonization under the English had condemned traditional healing and had referred to it as witchcraft. And so this really only got abolished in 1994. And so we have to consider the fact that, we are only less than 30 years. How many years since 1994 now? 26 years. And we must consider the fact that there are reasons why this is so difficult for us to do, to walk around with our body, to walk around with our beads, to walk around with a shoulder, whatever it is that you are required to do. It's because there's still that stigma that what we do is witchcraft. And the fact that, people like us were beaten down in the streets and arrested and all of this for being engaged in what was then known as witchcraft. And so that stigma still remains in a big way. And so it's difficult, like Ugo was saying now about, we're having to go back to this heritage, and in a big way we are having to reclaim it and redefine it and change that narrative around what we do, because none of what we do is witchcraft. None of what we do is a quick fix. There's no quick fixes. It's work. It's being on your hands and knees and doing work. And so, for me, there's nothing that I would consider witchcraft about what we do. And then I wanted to pose a question to Shifra about what it is that you feel we can do differently that creates a space of inclusion in the healing space. What can we do differently as healers?
Can you hear me? Because I know my earphones broke. So can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Yeah. Okay. So I will get to that question, but I've just, I'm very affected and taking in what everyone is saying. And I'm thinking, I also wasn't a conformist in a different way. And it's never been accepted because I'm not a psychologist. Yes, I did addictions training. Yes, I did advanced education, adult education. I got an advanced diploma. I was out of the country from 1975. I was beaten up. I left within 2 weeks and I only came back in 1988. So, I was in exile for quite a few years, and the only places I could go between were, because I had access to Israel, Palestine, and England, which, I worked undercover and I worked cash in hand because I didn't have passports or anything. But I was very unconventional I found through my circle, because I came out as queer in England, I couldn't imagine coming out in South Africa. First of all, my father wouldn't speak to me for 2 years when I did come out. And everybody said, oh God, she was so popular with the boys, she must have been really badly hurt by men. And there were narratives that were just so disturbing because no one expected me to be a lesbian. I didn't look like the so-called stereotype. And when I came back, I didn't shave and I didn't shave my legs, and my mother was infuriated. But slowly over time, they came to accept me. And in England, I had all the marriages I had 2 marriages of convenience. And it still was a big thing for my community. So, I did things differently, and I was always an outsider, and I've always had to fight and have had to assert queer rights and healing rights. So even now in my current job, I'm not registered. And so a lot of times, that force comes to me and I have to almost justify, or I have a lot of support, but we say we accept lay counselors, we accept people who are coaches, we accept people who say, they've been healing for years. And I'm thinking today, I want to, so inclusive means to have more contact, certainly with Indigenous healers and with all different kinds of healers. And it's the only way we're going to move forward where more people have access to difference, but also to inclusivity, and can choose, different ways that they want to heal, but where it's not seen as something so like witchcraft. And I know that I've had aspects of that, because I talk differently and I speak about human beings and kindness and compassion and empathy and inclusivity, and it's not always well received in those circles. But I do feel that I've contributed over the years to making a difference in making people like myself, and therefore difference, more acceptable and more understood. And I will continue to do that because I'm committed to us as a community, and to healing as the way forward, to intuition, I also have ancestors, and I'm very respectful, and I also hear and feel things and sense, and I live somatically. So I do want to share that, and I want to continue sharing that at the Counselling Hub. Thank you. I know I went off a million courses, but hey.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate your sentiments, and I agree with you. Is that we all have ancestors, and honoring those who come before us it's vital. It's important. And Gogo, Anele, I'd like to ask you the same question about how we can choose to be more inclusive. If you have any tips, any ways that you think we can be more inclusive as leaders, if you're available.
Because again, I think for me, I want us to normalize the word healing rather than focusing on treatment, because treatment is what creates problems. Because for you to treat, you need to diagnose it, right? And what Gogo Aya mentioned something about believability. It's very interesting that people give so much credibility to someone whom they've known. This person, they know them, and they have seen them undergoing this training. For legitimacy, that you are indeed a healer and you have the capacity of giving us what we want. I always say to people again, as much as I may be a trained psychologist, but I needed to respond to my call and undergo the training for people to believe in my other capacity of being a healer. Should it not be that I've undergone training and I am undergoing training and doing all the things that I'm doing now, chances of people believing what I can do as a healer, it's very minimal. In particular to space that we spoke about, that if I enter into Ndumbing where we do our work, my psychology doesn't matter there. Being a clinical psychologist doesn't matter. But what matters is that whatever divine, spiritual energies and experience of what I feel in that room is qualified by virtue that you have done this. So that for me brings to my point of, I want us to get to a point where we help people to understand the intensity of the work that comes with healing, and also to normalize other possibilities. I mean, Shifra works with an organization that understands that therapy is expensive. One, traditional healing or indigenous healing methods are easily accessible to people.
Yeah.
If I am going to say I'm going to do an analysis process, or I'm going to do an in-depth therapy process, it means in Johannesburg, one person for an hour to do analytic work, we need 1,200 rands. However, for someone, if we note the issue of class and race, if we can speak to those marginalized groups and normalize, make it appealing that traditional therapies are possible, which then means also as healers, we also need to expand our territory. Not to say that I can only see, yes, I can see that if you do have the capacity to still read on cognitive behavioral therapy, read on all of these other modalities that you may not necessarily be trained in, but at least you've got an understanding for people to believe what you do. So for me, the simple thing is, let's work with what exists, let's empower ourselves and make this work more appealing to people. That for me, at least I've got an advantage of class, of other elements that can make me more believable in what I do as a healer, as a psychologist in the room, and as one who does work in women and works with people from different perspectives. So for me, indigenous therapeutic, whatever way or how they look like, I believe that we can take something from that. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to agree. I think that in terms of inclusion and in terms of healing and the inclusion that comes from healing, I do think that there's a place for traditional healing. There is a place for different types of traditional healing, and we don't all do the same thing. It's so important for us to, be able to have access to places where we are not seen as witches or doing witchcraft. That's not the truth. But it is a safe environment for people to come and gain perspective on who they are and what it is that they need and what it is they need to do. So thank you for that. I'd also like to ask if Gogo Aya, if you can talk a little bit about why you think people are doing more investigation into healing modalities that are foreign to us and not indigenous to us versus doing investigation into indigenous practices. Why is it that continues even now?
Been sort of brainwashed, for lack of a better word, to believe that whatever practices we had been doing or they had been doing and the alternatives was not working, so to speak. So now they've gotten to a point where there are certain things they've stopped doing for so long that they don't want to open a can of worms. That's how I'd like to put it, because you would find someone comes for a consultation, and if you go way back and tell them where the problem started, a person will say, you are rather because so society has gotten to a point of not wanting to go back and sort of rip off the band-aid from the wounds. They would much rather let sleeping dogs lie. So, and for convenience for them, Western medicine or Western ways have become the norm, because they feel like, if, for an example, there are people who no longer do amasiko. And now if someone comes from low family and they would much rather die than even acknowledge that simple gift, because that means now this person and people don't want to fix mistakes of other people. So they've just decided, you know what, this works for me. My child unomshologu, so I'm not doing that. Let's go to a psychologist. And then Anele will say, bipolar, depressed. This person doesn't even have any of these things. Mara, they would much rather find an easier route, so to speak. I feel like they just want the easy way out. So the Western way would then be easier for them, as opposed to going back and digging up things that have been let to rest.
Tokoza Gogo, I have to agree with you because I think my life is living testament to what you're saying. A lot of things had to be fixed by me, and I'm still in the process of fixing those things because for how many generations, especially for a colored person, those things have not been fixed. It's not been paid attention to. It hasn't been important. It hasn't been something that anyone in my family has cared to do. And so it's just been pushed to the side. It's not been important, and Western medicine has been the way forward. And it's just been, like you say, an easy route, right? Because it's easy to say this is the issue. Then I'd like to ask Shifra the same question about why we focus on non-indigenous methods versus indigenous methods.
Sorry, Nadine, was that question, why do we focus on non-indigenous methods rather than indigenous?
Yes, yes.
You know, again, it's about colonization and it's about access. And I suppose the only way we could get a center and funding and access, you know, and employ just one or two people, which is what that is, was to not sell out, because I don't believe it is selling out, but it was a way that we had to use what system existed in order for us to then do the work of starting to decolonize. And of course, colonization is the issue, dispossession, loss, grief, trauma. I mean, what we see on a daily basis are the wounds of colonization. And I am very, very sensitive and aware to that. And we train, you know, we don't only have a psychological modality, we have a political, structural as well. We look at structural racism. We look at how many Black and people of color, you know, healers do we have? We were first, and as Anele said, you know, that word healing, it's like when you start using it, you know, you've got to be very careful because you might lose your funding if you don't say, you know, we use strength-based approaches. But we are moving slowly towards more indigenous methods or being inclusive as well, because for me, there are ways that I've learned techniques that seem to be based in Western modalities, but definitely come from wisdom and common sense from our ancestors and before we were alive. Things that when you're having negative self-speak, you know, when you're saying to yourself, oh shit, I'm a failure, you know, and I'm feeling depressed today because I didn't do that or whatever. And then how to contradict that, because it's about mind and body. It's about spirit and soul. And for me, ultimately, it is about how to heal the spirit and the soul that has been aggrieved. For me, that is what I see. And I don't believe that that is that much different to how the indigenous healers, I've got a lot to learn. I know that. And I need to listen more. But it is only by raising those things and being honest as a white person who does have that privilege and power, not as much as other people, because I'm relegated often to, well, you're not trained and you're not, you know, as Anele said about believability. But I believe it is up to us, all of us, to really decolonize. And it is slow. But I think if people like the Counseling Hub that are starting to be seen as something alternative, that is where, those are the places where we can be inclusive of learning about how to decolonize this beautiful thing called healing, where people can face their daily life challenges, come to you, your center, your person, and feel better about themselves. How wonderful is that?
Thank you so much. Gogo Anele, are you there? I'd like to pose one question to you about how we can include psychology and healing in terms of indigenous healings in practices that are, more clinically psychology based. How is it that we can, include small bits of what we do in a way that is meaningful and helpful from your perspective?
Sorry, could you please rephrase that? I didn't get that right. I got disturbed a bit. Can you repeat?
I'm so sorry. I was asking, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, I'm asking from your perspective as a clinical psychologist, how would you say we can, include small bits of our healing practices as traditional healers in a place that is more of a clinical psychologist space? How do we kind of mix it two in a way that makes sense from your perspective?
It goes back to what I said, the willingness to rely on others for knowledge and experience and exposure. Like Shifra mentioned, her privileges and some of the privilege doesn't have, and the willingness she has, knowing that she's a white positioned woman in South Africa, as much as she may do real work of healing, but she's aware of her potential limitations of what that can do for space and for what it can do for patients. I also feel that Sangomas or traditional healers need to work through their own prejudices, some stereotypes, and some of their resistances of how they perceive a medical specialist or psychologist or whoever who works from a medical or biomedical science model. So we need to appreciate as healers that there's space for biomedical approaches of helping us to understand what is going on with this person, and not to discard that, because there are medical conditions and psychological conditions that need psychiatric treatment, that need psychological interventions. So we need to be open to those possibilities and not treat everything as universal. That's my take.
Thank you. And then for the last 5 minutes, if we have any of our three healers that would like to add anything on, please just let me know, and then from there we'll do some questions before ending. So if any of the three healers, if you have anything to add, please just alert me, and then we can go from there.
Fine.
Okay, so is everyone good? No one has anything to add? Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. I'd just like to extend my thank yous to everyone who's been here, all of our healers. Thank you for your input. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for sharing perspective, because even as traditional healers, we work differently. We have different gifts, and so those different gifts manifest in different ways, and we do different things. So it's really interesting to hear a perspective into what everyone has said. So I just want to extend my thank yous. We also have a spoken word poem, I think, from a spoken word offering, sorry, from a participant from Sinesipho Mxoli. So if Sinesipho is ready, can we please have that spoken word? Thank you.
Africa, my roots. Africa, my pride. Africa, my motherland. Oh, Africa. Hear my cries. Where are those years couldn't find a man walk on the street drunk? Yes, those celebrating the diversity of our cultures, but now we are attending funerals of our mothers and sisters who died in the hands of men. Oh, Africa. When I look around, my spirit sings. So I look to the north, I see a boy child raising up a hand to its own mother. So I look to the south, I see fathers neglecting and abandoning their roles. So I run to the east. When the sun rises, a girl child is raped and killed. So where do I run to? Oh, Africa. Let us feel the pain that Uinene Mkhwetyana suffered and many others. Let us combine and unite to live a better life. For together we can. Oh yes, we can. Oh, Africa.
Oh wow, Sinesipho, thank you so much for that. That was beautiful. That was absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
We are now opening up the floor for any questions that anyone may have. Please just alert us and ask your questions or direct them to any of our healers and they will answer your questions now. Thank you.
Lebo, you can go ahead with your question.
Hi, thank you so much for a very ngesixhosa ndizothi tyebile ihliki. You know, it's been wonderful sitting here and listening and feeling that there is so much that I resonate with. I am also a Sangoma, a spiritual healer, but I'm also a psychologist. So for me, I sat here thinking, okay, yes. And my journey, and I'm sorry, I'm not asking a question more than I am making a comment because I really wanted us to get to the notion of decolonizing even first our approaches to the healing work, both at the level of the educated Western that we do, and also the indigenous spiritual for me, which is more important. So I went to school to study psychology simply because when I started experiencing my calling, you know, I also come from a good background. My parents were both professionals, father high up in the church. You know, they took me to a psychologist. And there was a lot of counseling that we did. And on one hand, I felt this was helping me. And on one hand, I really resonated with the therapy that I was getting from my psychologist. And they assisted me to see things in a very clear way, to make better decisions about my life. However, there was also a very deep-seated place within me that they couldn't pathologize, that they couldn't diagnose, that they couldn't touch, they couldn't get to that place. And so there I was confused. I'm confused because on the one hand, I get that this is so beneficial, what I'm going through, but on the other hand, it's not, you know, doing enough to get to a place that I can feel, okay, fine, I'm getting what I need to get, because there's a lot here also that I'm experiencing at a very deep-seated spiritual level. So I had to ask myself, you know, how do these two worlds work together when I understood that I needed to consult. Eventually and subsequently, I needed to twasa. And I won't go into my twasaring journey because it's been a long journey. As some Sangomas and Nyangas and Namagakha will know, I also, you know, there's 3 different schools of twasa that I've had to undergo. So for me, going into the question is to have to ask yourself the question, and this is the fundamental question that we have to ask ourselves as Africans. Before colonialization, who were we? Because we had an identity. And our identity was one that was in tune with the soil. It was in tune with nature. We knew what to do. We knew what the direction of a particular wind meant. We knew what to do when we were experiencing moments of drought. We knew what sicknesses and what particular illnesses meant and what was missing from our lives. What happened to that knowledge? So colonization comes along and it really messes up all of those indigenous knowledges and those modalities of being and those ways of being that have been working for thousands and thousands of years. We were a thriving people who had answers for our issues and our problems. But what colonization failed to do is to completely eradicate that knowledge, because it is intrinsic to our identities as African people. Therefore, it cannot be dead. For as long as we are still Africans walking on this soil that is Africa, parts of that identification will be in our blood. And that is why there are certain things that whether psychology or Western medicine or whatever will never be able to treat, will never be able to deal with. Because there are things that we knew to do. That is why even today, for me, I'm an example of that. Part of my calling was becoming very sick. I was on my deathbed, but I went to the best hospitals. And we go there, and then the triage stage would happen, and then the doctor would tell me, your blood pressure is fine, everything looks good, there's nothing wrong with you. And yet I'm feeling like any moment I could die. Until I understood that I had to accept this calling, and only then. So part of our decolonizing is to be unapologetic about our sacred spaces and the connections we have as healers to those sacred spaces. And this thing of healers only going to the sea or to the forests or to the cliffs in the dead of night must end, because the reason why we do that is because we are so scared to go and ukuhlamba abantu emzini omkhulu, simply because we are a peculiarity. We are peculiar. What is this practice? We are barbaric. I refuse to be barbaric. I do it in the dead of the day. At 12 o'clock, I'm at the sea. If I need to work at the sea, we go to the forest at any time, because I'm unapologetic about returning the sacredcy of those spaces. And in that way, slowly but surely, I start to decolonize my own mind around my identity as an African, around my identity as a healer and a spiritualist. And I think we have to continually interrogate this for ourselves as healers. Thank you.
Wow.
Hi. Of course. That hit home in a deep way that I'm trying not to get emotional. But thank you so much for sharing. The thing there that stands out to me is that even me recently, I had to go to the ocean for a ceremony. And it was cold. It was two Sunday nights ago. It was so cold. And I went at night, and I had to go into that water at night, and it was windy. And I sat there thinking to myself, we have these big chats about decolonization, but why am I here at night? The very land that my grandmother talks about having been taken away from her, that Noordhoek side of Cape Town. And yeah, I am in the dark because, and then it's what you're saying. And then, wow, and then I wanted to say, yeah, people think that this thing is easy, but even me, I've gone twice at two different places because I had to go to finish that Eastern Cape route. And then I had to go to our old places and all the Zulu women, which I would have never thought, looking at me, where I grew up, the people that I came from, or the people I thought I came from, but I've never in my life thought that I would have to go, Mama, of course, like I would have never ever thought that. And there I was. So what you're saying is profound, and it stands, wow, because, as long as we are living, this is our lives, and this will continue, of course. And then we have another question from Quentin Manning, who asked, how do our mental wellness and our spiritual wellness intersect? When we are healing one, do we heal both, or do we have to start with one and then the other? Do we have anyone who wants to take that question?
Yeah, I think if you're not coming forth with spirituality as part of your practice of healing, then it's hard to integrate that. But for healers who that is the essence of their beings is to heal themselves and to heal their minds and bodies together so that we can be whole people, which we know has not been easy in our lives. And I don't know if I'm answering the question now, but I feel that it needs to be an integrated practice. And that's why, for me, when we started the counseling hub, it was very important for us to say multi-faith, just so that it could be more inclusive, not necessarily for, established religions, but more as faith-based, meaning that the soul and the spirit are part of what we see as integrated healing. So this is a space where, you can come for a greater sense of spiritual, soul, mind, body, wholeness healing. I feel it's vital to be able to bring that together. Yeah, thanks. I hope that answered something.
Thank you. No, I have to agree with that. I think, and that's the really, if I take it back to obviously what I know and the process of Twasa, it kind of mixes all of these things together. You don't heal one thing and become this new person, if I can put it that way, without healing all of these aspects of who you are. So for me, I don't think that you can start with the one without the other one being it happening simultaneously. Once you, because I mean, at the end of the day, you can't do these things if you're not in the mental space to do it. You can force yourself to go into Wasa, you can force yourself to go to therapy. But if you have no motivation to actually do it or be there, then it doesn't really count for anything because you won't be actually doing the work. So I believe that it is something that needs to be done together, needs to be done when you are ready. So yes, I do believe that they intersect and they work side by side to create the humans that we see presenting themselves. Do we have any other questions from anyone before we finish for any of our healers? You guys are also welcome to just turn on your mic and ask your question aloud. That's also fine.
Nadine, if you will allow me to just make one final comment, please.
Sure, go ahead.
I think one of the things is that we also have to normalize and understand that because of the identity of our African identity, there are things that we need our spiritual identity to take care of. And that also means if we have this identity, our spiritualness doesn't necessarily necessitate twasaring, but it is a way to understand, and it is a way to from the question that was asked around mental health and around spirituality. Consulting healers is not always about because you want to twasa or because you have a calling. Not everybody has a calling, but everybody should be able to consult, to feed their spirituality. Because I am sorry, but pre-colonialization, where was this Christianity? Pre-colonialization, where were these religions? How were we thriving as a people outside of the Christianity that came from the West? So for me, it's to say, yes, there's no problem. If your spirit feels that it resonates with Christian, that's fine. But can we not be vilified for being true to our African identities as a people, not just as healers or as Nyanga or as Sangoma? Because anyway, there are people who are gifted, whether you are a medical doctor, whether you're a psychologist, whether you're a yogi, whether you deal with the tarot, for example. All of these are gifts that we are given so that we can add to the healing and the actualization of humanity. But for me, it is to say we need a place where we can now open our minds as a people and understand that we have an identity that predates colonialization. That's all I want to say. We have an identity that predates colonialization, and we will not be doing this world any kind of service if we are to negate that identity. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much for that. I have to agree that, before colonization, we had all of our own beliefs and all of our own, ways of being, and we were fine. We were people who are thriving. So it's not that, we necessarily need all of these aspects in order to thrive as people. And for sure that comes with freedom of choice and what people want to do. If they want to follow that path, that's fine, but it shouldn't be seen as this or else. And so I think that's important. So thank you so much, Gogo. If anyone has any other questions, please let us know. You can just unmute your mic and ask the question. If there aren't any more questions, I think we will be finishing off soon. Okay, everyone. So it appears we do not have any more questions. Again, I just want to reiterate and apologize for the noise where I am. I had to go to a coffee shop just to quickly fill in for the person who was going to moderate. So please excuse me. And then I just want to thank everyone who was here, all of the healers. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your perspective with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you for everyone who also joined us. And we hope we can keep this conversation going and it can, hopefully create some change within our country and within the way we operate and the way we interact with each other, and so we can all interact from a place of kindness. Again, we appreciate you so much. Thank you for coming and viewing this year's edition of the Q-Triple-F Film Festival. Even though we have to be apart because of COVID, we really appreciate you all. Thank you so much. Goodbye. I'm out of my course.